So, our topic is Greek philosophy and churches destroy Christians, and we're on part 4. This is a series. You can see the other ones in the links in the description down below. We've got the playlist down there of each video. There's also a playlist for it. So, this one today, I'm going to be reading from some comments that I made in exchange with Christopher, who's a longtime subscriber here on the channel, dearly loved brother, and I'm going to be reading mostly from my own comments because in those I go into great depth on some of these particular details. So Christopher makes a comment on video number 3. The video is called Cause and Effect, Broken by the Power of Jesus. And he comments on likening this to programming, the universe here, to programming. And I understand where he's coming from because in the modern age, which we're no longer in, we're in the postmodern age, actually. We made a transition around the 90s into the postmodern age. And some of you grew up in the modern age when science was exalted without challenge. The postmodern era, though, is suspicious of science and tends towards believing conspiracies. And if they don't believe the conspiracies, that's the right or far right, depends on how you look at it. Then you believe in subjectivism, which is the left or far left, depending on how you look at it. And so both of them criticize science now in the postmodern era. So he likens it to a program. He says, I've sort of imagined the Lord's miracles in terms of programming. The programmer programs a virtual universe and programs the laws, quote, laws that govern the universe. But at any time, the programmer can call or otherwise inject code that overrides or outright defies those immutable physical laws as he sees fit. Since God created the real universe, then like the programmer of the virtual universe, he can also manipulate the programming of the real universe whenever he sees fit and at the drop of a hat. With God, all things are possible. He puts quotes because it's from the scriptures, okay? Now, many of you, that will resonate with you. And that's probably because, like I said, you grew up, your formative years were in the modern age, or if you're from another country, maybe your formative years were during the beginning of the postmodern era for the US, but it's still the modern era for your country. So here's my reply, and I'm not disagreeing with him or anything like that. I'm just trying to steer it in a different direction here. Yes, you were clearly raised in the modern age and not the postmodern when science was still king. Scientists in the early years of the scientific endeavor imagined the creation, for most of them believed in God, as constrained by sets of laws that, if discovered, would allow man to take control of anything and everything in the universe. Sound familiar? Tower of Babel, the Garden of Eden, and the serpent's lie. The devil's temptation of Christ. The idea of every aspect of nature being governed by laws and constrained by them was founded by the presumption of causality as a universal constant throughout time and space. All right, so let me just summarize that before we go on with the rest of this. So this idea that every aspect of nature is governed by laws and constrained by laws, that they must obey those laws, this comes out of the idea of causality and the proposition that causality is universal throughout all of time, that from the beginning to the end of time has been causality, cause and effect. And across all of space, everywhere you can go in the universe, you have cause and effect. This is the assumption, but we cannot prove it, okay? All right. So, ironic, since our very concept of time and space arises from the observations of causality itself. In other words, as we watch cause and effect, and I demonstrated this with an example of throwing the ball at the window and breaking it, and I talked about how that gives rise to the sense of space and the sense of time by that cause and effect. Okay? So let me read those two again. The idea of every aspect of nature being governed by laws and constrained by them was founded on the presumption of causality as a universal constant throughout time and space. Ironic, since our very concept of time and space arises from the observations of causality itself. Now, you're going to recognize then that it's going to be difficult to prove causality across all of time and all of space when time and space itself arises out of causality, our sense of it. And yet you might argue that, well, that itself proves that it must be uniform and universal. All right, so then I say, yet our observations of it are not universal, but limited to particulars, aka individuals observing, you and me, from their particular position within the universe and within time. So I occupy a certain span of time in the history of the universe. I occupy certain positions within the space of the universe during this time. And I'm limited to those because before I was born, I could not be in any place. And after I'm gone from here, I can't be in any place in the universe. And therefore, I'm limited to whatever positions I can occupy during this time frame that I occupy. Okay? That's what we're talking about by particulars or individuals observing. So it says, yet our observations of it, of causality, are not universal. In other words, I can't observe it universally across all the universe or across all of time. But it's limited to particulars, aka individuals observing from their particular position within the universe and within time. There is no telling whether causality applies throughout time or throughout what we perceive as space. We simply do not have access to either of these in their complete form in order to test the idea. In other words, we can't access all of time and we can't access all of space, and therefore we cannot prove that causality is uniform and universal. All right, let's keep going. I know this is a bit heavy. Yet we have exalted causality to a God. And so our computer science is founded on causality. And our assumption is that programs cannot behave other than how they were programmed. And yet, they sporadically crash. Sometimes it is due to a hard drive error, either from age or from electromagnetic interference, such as solar activity or welding nearby. Those are only some of the causes we have found, and yet there could be instances with no cause at all, and we would never know. We would simply say we don't yet know the cause for those instances. This statement assumes there is causality uniformly behind everything we encounter. We cannot know that, and it is clearly not true for the Christian in light of miracles. In addition, developers of AI admit that they cannot predict how the AI will respond to questions. This tells us that the causality has broken down in LLM programs, large language model programs. So while we were tricked into thinking that programming was something that imitated those early dreams of science about a universe that perfectly obeyed a set of laws, we find out it is all deceit. It is a Greek philosophical system imposed to make us feel like everything can be controlled. And the call of Jesus through the cross from beyond the grave, calling out from the throne of God, breaks causality. Then I go into this other reply. I say C.S. Lewis made the mistake of subjecting the God he believed in to imaginary moral fabric of the universe he constructed in his mind. He believed that there were absolute moral values woven as the fabric of the universe, and that even God is subject to them. In other words, that there is something above God to which he must conform. That is in fact not true. Morality is subjective, but only in the sense that there is one real subject in the universe, and he is God. From his choices of how to be flow the qualities we know of as morality. So how God chose to be reveals to us love. If he had chosen to be differently, then love would have been different. In the end, morality is both subjective, with only one determining subject, God, and also objective, since God does not change. This is something I have studied extensively and probably will include in a video in this series. So here we are, okay? Now here's another reply that I make to him on the Big Bang. Interestingly, the Big Bang theory implies there is God, since there is no first cause preceding the existence of the content of the universe. There's nothing in the Big Bang theory that comes before the Big Bang that causes it. Okay? So it implies there's a God. There has to be a God that initiates it. They can only solve it by either postulating the universe is itself eternal, or that there was no starting point for the Big Bang before which there was nothing. Or they declare that time did not exist until the Big Bang, but then the until implies the existence of time, and they fail. So they could simply say there was nothing preceding the Big Bang in order to sidestep that until. However, nothing is in contrast with something. You cannot measure nothing, just as you cannot measure cold. This means that preceding the Big Bang, there could not be nothing. Nothing must be in contrast with something, either somewhere else in space or somewhere else in the preceding time. Aside from postulating an eternal universe, the only option left is an eternal God preceding the Big Bang. Then I say, you see, the problem, again, is their deterministic view of the universe. Their causality is limited to what they can detect with their senses or with additional instruments to aid their senses. By that, I mean only the basic rudimentary 5 senses. We, as true followers of Christ, having been born from above, have other senses that come to play in our daily life, waking and sleeping. One of them is prayer. That's one of our senses. Think about that for a while. Now, here is the last reply I'm going to read here from commenting with Chris. The fault is in the premises for epistemology, how we know what we know. Scientists have set up a system that tells them whether to believe something or not. And this system is limited to the reproducible events of the universe, except in the case of astronomy and archaeology. They somehow get a pass. And you say, well, why? Well, because to reproduce events, well, try reproducing an event in astronomy is impossible. You can't. Same with archaeology. Everything is already gone. It's in the past. And so you have no access to be able to reproduce it over that span of time. I mean, the amount of time that passes for those things to happen in archaeology, you can't reproduce that because you have your own lifespan. And in astronomy, it's a similar problem with epochs and time that you're looking at, but also in astronomy, we're looking at the scale, the size of these things, like a star or a universe. So they get a pass. Nevertheless, the epistemology, how do we know what we know? Epistemology is limited to the observable and measurable parts of the universe. So that includes astronomy and archaeology. The next step is to examine the causality of what is observed or measured. So what caused it to make that effect? So this then assumes everything is subject to cause and effect, a presumption that cannot be proven. You cannot prove that everything is, because you have no access to everything. Yet those two are the foundation of their faith in their epistemology. Okay? So observing and measuring, if you can't observe and measure it, then it's not part of the reality and universe. They don't believe in it. And if it doesn't have a cause and effect relationship between other things, then it's not real. Okay? Those are the two foundations for their belief system, their epistemology. Yet those two are the foundation of their faith in their epistemology. Faith in what they know. So when the atheist scoffs at entertaining a spiritual realm or an invisible and immeasurable being who is God, you'll be sympathetic that he has inherited a broken system that limits his knowledge to a poor subset of reality. He is, in effect, indoctrinated into a cult. To them, the Bible is not talking about anything more than history and literature. To them, angels and demons and Satan and God and the Holy Spirit are at best symbols and at worst myths. With atheists, it is best to attack the entire foundation of knowledge. Prove to them that we cannot know anything for certain. Level the playing field from their side. Okay, so that's one tact that I take, in addition to a couple others. First thing is to try to get them to admit that we cannot know anything for certain. And, well, they'd have to admit that because if they believe in science, science itself has proven that with quantum physics. Then ask them if they are aware that they are hypocrites. Ask them if they have ever prayed to God in their life. If they have, then ask them why they attribute knowledge to things passed down by men who tend toward corruption and ignorance. Ask them why they reject what most people on the entire planet throughout most of history have believed in. If they claim God has been merely a myth or a God of the gaps, something to explain things until you know a scientific explanation for them, that's God of the gaps. You use God as an explanation until you learn the real scientific explanation. That's how they would say it, right? So if they claim that God has been merely a myth or a God of the gaps, just to explain things until they are able to explain it through science, chide them for misrepresenting the faiths of nearly all people on the earth. For people all over the planet continue to believe in God even when they know how something happens. And this is critical, so listen up. How is confused with why in scientists' minds. How explains the processes. Why explains an agent's will for choosing to make that work. Science does not address why, and it cannot. Yet they continue to use that language to confuse the issue, some of them on purpose. They already know that. They continue to say, why? Did they give an explanation for why? No, they don't. They cannot. It's impossible with science. If they have not tested God through prayer, then ask why they haven't applied the scientific method to it. Challenge them to get on their knees every night and ask God sincerely to reveal himself to the person, to them. Tell them they must give it some time too, like 3 to 6 weeks. And they must be watching their daily life for signs of God communicating with them. This is how you deal with an atheist who's given over to this kind of a system. So I know these details are a bit heavy compared to the last 3 videos, but this dives in much deeper on this 3rd video of causality, cause and effect. And we also touch on some very beneficial issues around epistemology. How do we know what we know? May the Lord bless you as you seek him with all your heart.